And I think today we are very lucky that Mr. Jeremić is with us today. I introduced him to you in the beginning of discussion. He has a unique standpoint due to his experience to this agenda, to this long-term development, and to what happens now. Vuk, you have the floor now, and we really appreciate if you summarize this discussion for us.
Well, thank you very much for letting me speak the last and be able to learn from the previous speakers. It's a particular pleasure for me to be back in St. Petersburg at SPIEF after 11 years. The last time I was here, I was in my role as President of the UN General Assembly and the person in charge of negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals. I was, as a matter of fact, the inaugural chairman of the panel in the United Nations that ultimately led to the creation of the SDGs in 2015. And I must start by saying how different the world is now in comparison to then, when we started the process of negotiation. And the hopes were very high, and the atmosphere here in St. Petersburg was different, the atmosphere in New York was different, the atmosphere pretty much everywhere was different. And the hopes were high, and the sky was the limit. And I remember at that time, things coming together relatively easily. In terms of agreeing what's the next step, in terms of agreeing what would be the structure of the goals and the sub-goals and all of that. And it is, of course, very difficult to abstract away the fact that things are profoundly different in the world right now. And that the composition of the crowd here in St. Petersburg is very different from back in 2013. And that there isn't much discussion and debate going in quality terms at the highest level between principal drivers of what we today have as globalization, our version of globalization. So if things don't work out in multilateral terms, and they don't, then perhaps the best next thing is to try and do what you can. And then this is the second best to multilateralism in my experience and in my opinion. It is minilateralism. And BRICS is a very good example of a nascent, if you will, in structural terms at least, nascent minilateral organization that should come in a way, that should come as a second best if you can't really do things in the UN, if you can't really do things in other fora, if the lines of political communication are broke and are likely to stay broke, in my opinion. Pardon me for being less optimistic this time round than back in 2013. But speaking about the BRICS, and I heard all the very competent speakers here, presenting the divergencies basically that exist in the taxonomies and generally the rules and principles that drive those separate markets. I personally happened to have a conversation earlier this week with the Central Bank of Russia, and they gave me a very good presentation of what they're doing, and this taxonomy and green and social and transition, and I think it's very remarkable, as a matter of fact. I think a lot of people outside Russia aren't aware of the fact that Russia is so advanced in this regard. And the fact that Russia is so advanced and that Russia is chairing BRICS and that the BRICS is second best to global, I think that Russia should emphasize and prioritize this in its leadership, in its chairmanship of the BRICS, the convergence of regulations, approaches, taxonomies. And I know it sounds like an impossible task right now because everything's so divergent. But like every mile, every trip, even like a 1,000-mile trip starts with the first step. I can imagine in not so distant future from now, a secretariat of the BRICS. And I can imagine a secretariat, having a task, like a strong task, to converge those regulations and taxonomies, so that ultimately you can start trading these instruments between each other, because that is absolutely essential. The Russian market on its own is not enough. Even the Chinese market, which is kind of bigger, isn't enough on its own. But the BRICS market, and Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund purchasing Russian transition instruments, and Chinese banks buying Brazilian green bonds and creating a market of that sort, I can envisage this in maybe a few years from now, if the priorities are set right at the political level. And I'm very glad to hear all the speakers that came before me emphasizing how seriously the Russian leadership is taking it up. But I think that the next crucial thing's got to be Russia stepping up on the international scene, meaning on BRICS summit with the BRICS leadership in its hand, and making this a priority. And then I honestly believe that, again, sky could be the limit. And I'm also a big believer in the fact that geopolitical relations are cyclical. We are going through a very bad cycle. We're going through a recession in geopolitical terms, a big recession. I hope it doesn't get to a depression, because depression equivalent in geopolitics is a global war. I hope we don't get there. But this cycle is going to be over once. Maybe not next year. Maybe not the year after. But I think that, God willing, we're all going to be alive when this negative cycle ends. And inside a positive cycle, global cooperation is going to reemerge. But if you entered that stage having matured and elaborated and worked very closely within the BRICS first, then you'd be, again, amongst those setting the global parameters in this field as well. And therefore, I will end on the optimistic note that these conversations that I've had so far in St. Petersburg give me reasons for hope. Thanks.
Спасибо большое.